A Voice from Waterloo is the humble tale of an old soldier who was an eyewitness to and participant in many of the scenes he attempts to describe. Edward Cotton served in the 7th Hussars. He has survived the battle. Let's begin. On our awakening the next morning, each of us must have experienced something like astonishment, not unmingled, I hope, with feelings of gratitude, that amid such carnage as we had witnessed, our lives and strength were still spared, to fight again, if need should be, the battles of our country. We knew we had beaten the French, and that too, completely, for our last charge had succeeded at every point. But they were not defeated because they were deficient either in bravery or discipline. Their bearing throughout the day was that of gallant soldiers. Their attacks were conducted with a chivalric impetuosity and admirably sustained vigor, which left no shadow of doubt upon our minds of their entire devotedness to the cause of Napoleon, of their expectation of victory, and the determination of many of them not to survive defeat. The best and bravest of them fell, but not until they had inflicted almost equal loss upon their conquerors. To deny them the tribute of respect and admiration which their bravery and misfortunes claim, would tarnish the luster of our martial glory. The British soldier is content with victory, he abhors insult and cruelty, he has a pleasure in being just and generous to a fallen foe. That the French in their flight from Waterloo were unnecessarily butchered during many hours by the exasperated Prussians is a fact which I can more easily explain than justify. The field of battle, after the victory, presented a frightful and most distressing spectacle. It appeared as if the whole military world had been collected together, and that something beyond human strength and ingenuity had been employed to cause its destruction. Solicitude for the wounded prompted the Duke to ride back to Brussels immediately after the sanguinary contest. The assistance of the town authorities was requested in collecting and removing the wounded from the field, burying the dead, etc., as well as to restore confidence amongst the population and allay the extreme excitement which prevailed throughout Belgium. Right nobly did the inhabitants of Brussels respond to his appeal. The clergy, as might have been expected, were foremost in their exertions to relieve the dreadful agonies of so many gallant and innocent sufferers. The highest in rank rivaled the hardier classes in performing the most trying offices for the mangled heroes that filled the hospitals, and encumbered even many private dwellings. Ladies of the honoured names of Moreau and Robillot set an illustrious example by their presence on the field the morning after the battle, the scene of carnage, so revolting to their delicate and tender nature, stimulating, instead of preventing, their humane exertions. Many other ladies, like ministering angels, shared in this work of mercy to the wounded, of whatever nation they might be, or in whatever cause they had fallen. The Allied army proceeded on the 19th to Nivelles, a most wonderful military exploit after such a desperate battle, where it was joined by the detached force under Prince Frederick and General Sir Charles Colville. His Grace overtook us on the 21st, on which day we entered France. On the day previous to the Allied army entering the country, the Duke issued the following General Order. Nivelles, June 20, 1815. As the army is about to enter the French territory, the troops of the nations which are at present under the command of Field Marshal the Duke of Wellington, are desired to recollect that their respective sovereigns are the allies of His Majesty the King of France, and that France ought, therefore, to be treated as a friendly country. It is therefore required that nothing should be taken either by officers or soldiers, for which payment be not made. The Field Marshal takes this opportunity of returning to the army his thanks for their conduct in the glorious action fought on the 18th inst., and he will not fail to report his sense of their conduct, in the terms which it deserves, to their several sovereigns. Wellington. The Duke's headquarters on the 21st were at Malplaquet, the scene of one of the great Marlborough's victories in 1709. He immediately issued a proclamation to the French people, which exemplifies the wisdom, firmness, and moderation that ever marked the career of our illustrious commander. He worthily represented a brave, victorious, but humane people, the inhabitants of the British Empire. Proclamation. Be it known to the French people that I enter their country at the head of a victorious army, not as an enemy, excepting to the usurper, the declared enemy of the human race, with whom we can have neither peace nor truce, but to assist them to throw off the iron yoke by which they have been borne down. For this purpose I have issued the accompanying orders to my army, let all who shall infringe those orders be reported to me. The French people, however, must be aware that I have a right to require them so to conduct themselves that I may be warranted in protecting them from all aggression. They will therefore provide whatever shall be demanded of them by persons duly authorized, receiving in exchange receipts in proper form and order. They will remain peaceably in their dwellings, and will hold no correspondence nor communication with the usurper or his adherents. All persons abandoning their homes after our entry into France, or absenting themselves in order to serve the usurper, shall be looked upon as his partisans and our enemies, and their property shall be confiscated and applied to the maintenance of the troops. Wellington. Given at headquarters, Malplaquet. June 22, 1815. Whilst the Duke was addressing this language to the French people, the fallen usurper, having awakened from his short dream of empire and spoliation, made a last but fruitless effort to continue to delude his discomfited partisans. On the very same day that Wellington's proclamation went forth from Malplaquet, Napoleon issued the following declaration. Palace of the Élysée. June 22, 1815. French people. In commencing hostilities to uphold your national independence, I relied upon the combined efforts and goodwill of all classes, as well as the cooperation of all official persons in the country. Hence sprang my hopes of success, and willingness to set at defiance all the proclamations of the powers against me. Circumstances appear to me to be altered. I tender myself in sacrifice to the hatred of the enemies of France. May they be sincere in their declarations. May their hostility really aim at nothing but me personally. My political life is at an end, and I proclaim my son, under the name of Napoleon II, Emperor of the French. The present ministers will constitute provisionally the Council of State. My interest in my son's well-being leads me to invite the chambers to proceed without delay to provide a regency by an enactment for this purpose. Make united efforts to preserve the public peace and your national independence. Napoleon. This production neither aroused the French to make fresh sacrifices for his sake, nor stayed the victorious march of the Allies upon Paris. On the 24th of June we took Cambrai, which was given up on the following day to Louis XVIII. This was the last occasion on which I saw a shot fired in a hostile manner. Our 1st Brigade of Guards took Péronne on the 26th. The Duke on this occasion had a narrow escape. After directing his staff to get under shelter in the ditch of an outwork, he posted himself in a sally port of the glacis. A staff officer, having a communication to make to his grace, came suddenly upon him and drew the attention of the enemy, who treacherously discharged a howitzer loaded with grape at the point. It shattered the wall against which the Duke was standing, and made, to use the words of one who saw him immediately afterwards, his blue coat completely red. Meanwhile Grouchy, who was at Wavre, having heard of the utter failure of his imperial master at Waterloo, commenced a retreat on Paris, vigorously followed by the 2 Prussian corps under Thielmann and Perch. During this retreat, Grouchy displayed more skill, energy, and decision than in his pursuit of the Prussians, on the 17th and 18th. The Prussians, who were on our left, had several sharp engagements with the enemy during their advance upon Paris, and both armies reached the environs of the capital on the 1st of July. Hostilities ceased, and a military convention was signed in the evening of the 3rd. On the morning of this day, Ziethen's corps had a sharp action, in which they were victors, at Issy near Paris. The campaign thus, by a singular coincidence, was brought to a close by the same troops that opened it. The Allied and Prussian armies entered Paris on the 7th of July, and were followed the next day by Louis XVIII. Before the end of the month, the armies of Europe congregated in and around Paris, amounted nearly to the enormous number of 1,000,000 men in arms. Napoleon, in the meantime, had left the capital. The Emperor surrendered at sea on the 15th of July to Captain Maitland, of the Bellerophon. By a decree of the Allied powers, he was sent to St. Helena, where he died on May 5, 1821. Since these events, more than 30 years have passed over us, and peace between the 2 greatest nations of the globe, England and France, has been uninterruptedly maintained. Long may it continue, to the honor of those whose blood and valor purchased it, and to the lasting happiness of the civilized world. It was the prospect of securing this immense benefit to mankind that united all European nations against the ambition of Napoleon, and that afforded the best comfort under the distressing sacrifices made to ensure his overthrow. Perhaps no people benefited by his fall so much as the French themselves. His triumphs, often great in a military point of view, left nothing in their hands, whilst they filled every family in France with mourning. The conscription was a more searching tyranny than civilized men had ever before endured, and all this blood flowed in vain. Our Gallic neighbors have sometimes mistaken the tone of triumph in which we speak of the downfall of Napoleon, and have regarded it as insulting to them. Nothing is farther from the mind and heart of the British soldier, who is always ready to acknowledge their military excellence. The dispatch of the Duke of Wellington, written immediately after the battle, cannot fail to interest everyone. It is a document that has fixed the attention of statesmen and soldiers, not only because of the importance of the event it describes but also for the noble simplicity, perfect calmness, and exemplary modesty that characterized the great man who penned it. It stands in honorable contrast with the hurried, inflated, and untrue accounts of military achievements often given by commanders of no small renown. London Gazette Extraordinary. Downing Street, June 22, 1815. Major the Honourable H. Percy arrived late last night with a dispatch from Field Marshal the Duke of Wellington, K.G. to Earl Bathurst, His Majesty's Principal Secretary of State for the War Department, of which the following is a copy. To Earl Bathurst. Waterloo, June 19, 1815. My Lord. Bonaparte, having collected the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 6th Corps of the French army, and the Imperial Guard, and nearly all the cavalry, on the Sambre, and between that river and the Meuse, between the 10th and 14th of the month, advanced on the 15th and attacked the Prussian posts at Thuin and Lobs, on the Sambre, at daylight in the morning. I did not hear of these events till the evening of the 15th, and I immediately ordered the troops to prepare to march, and afterwards to march to their left, as soon as I had intelligence from other quarters to prove that the enemy's movement upon Charleroi was the real attack. The enemy drove the Prussian posts from the Sambre on that day, and General Zieten, who commanded the corps that had been at Charleroi, retired upon Fleurus, and Marshal Prince Blucher concentrated the Prussian army upon Somboeuf, holding the villages in front of his position of Street Amand and Ligny. The enemy continued his march along the road from Charleroi towards Brussels, and, on the same evening, the 15th, attacked a brigade of the Army of the Netherlands, under the Prince de Weimar, posted at Frans, and forced it back to the farmhouse, on the same road, called Les Quatre Bras. The Prince of Orange immediately reinforced this brigade with another of the same division, under General Poponcha, and, in the morning early, regained part of the ground that had been lost, so as to have the command of the communication leading from Nivelles and Brussels with Marshal Blucher's position. In the meantime, I had directed the whole army to march upon Les Quatre Bras, and the 5th Division, under Lieutenant General Sir Thomas Picton, arrived at about 2:30 in the day, followed by the corps of troops under the Duke of Brunswick, and afterwards by the contingent of Nassau. At this time, the enemy commenced an attack upon Prince Blucher with his whole force, excepting the 1st and 2nd Corps, and a corps of cavalry under General Kellerman, with which he attacked our post at Les Quatre Bras. The Prussian army maintained their position with their usual gallantry and perseverance, against a great disparity of numbers, as the 4th Corps of their army, under General Bullow, had not joined, and I was not able to assist them as I wished, as I was attacked myself, and the troops, the cavalry in particular, which had a long distance to march, had not arrived. We maintained our position also, and completely defeated and repulsed all the enemy's attempts to get possession of it. The enemy repeatedly attacked us with a large body of infantry and cavalry, supported by a numerous and powerful artillery. He made several charges with the cavalry upon our infantry, but all were repulsed in the steadiest manner. In this affair, His Royal Highness the Prince of Orange, the Duke of Brunswick, and Lieutenant General Sir Thomas Picton, and Majors General Sir James Kempt and Sir Dennis Pack, who were engaged from the commencement of the enemy's attack, highly distinguished themselves, as well as Lieutenant General Charles Baron Alton, Major General Sir Colin Halkett, Lieutenant General Cook, and Majors Generals Maitland and Byng, as they successively arrived. The troops of the 5th Division, and those of the Brunswick Corps, were long and severely engaged, and conducted themselves with the utmost gallantry. I must particularly mention the 28th, 42nd, 79th, and 92nd Regiments, and the battalion of Hanoverians. Our loss was great, as your lordship will perceive by the enclosed return, and I have particularly to regret His Serene Highness the Duke of Brunswick, who fell fighting gallantly at the head of his troops. Although Marshal Blucher had maintained his position at Somboeuf, he still found himself much weakened by the severity of the contest in which he had been engaged, and, as the 4th Corps had not arrived, he determined to fall back and to concentrate his army upon Wavre, and he marched in the night, after the action was over. This movement of the Marshal rendered necessary a corresponding one upon my part, and I retired from the farm of Quatre Bras upon Genappe, and thence upon Waterloo, the next morning, the 17th, at 10 o'clock. The enemy made no effort to pursue Marshal Blucher. On the contrary, a patrol which I sent to Somboeuf in the morning found all quiet, and the enemy's vedette fell back as the patrol advanced. Neither did he attempt to molest our march to the rear, although made in the middle of the day, except by following, with a large body of cavalry brought from his right, the cavalry under the Earl of Uxbridge. This gave Lord Uxbridge an opportunity of charging them with the 1st Life Guards, upon their debouche from the village of Genappe, upon which occasion his lordship has declared himself to be well satisfied with that regiment. The position which I took up in front of Waterloo crossed the high roads from Charleroi and Nivelles, and had its right thrown back to a ravine near Merbraine, which was occupied, and its left extended to a height above the hamlet Terlahaye, which was likewise occupied. In front of the right centre, and near the Nivelles road, we occupied the house and gardens of Hougoumont, which covered the return of that flank, and in front of the left centre we occupied the farm of La Haye-Sainte. By our left we communicated with Marshal Prince Blucher at Wavre, through Ohain, and the Marshal had promised me that, in case we should be attacked, he would support me with one or more corps, as might be necessary. The enemy collected his army, with the exception of the 3rd Corps, which had been sent to observe Marshal Blucher, on a range of heights in our front, in the course of the night of the 17th and yesterday morning, and at about 10 o'clock he commenced a furious attack upon our post at Hougoumont. I had occupied that post with a detachment from General Byng's brigade of guards, which was in position in its rear, and it was for some time under the command of Lieutenant Colonel MacDonell, and afterwards of Colonel Home, and I am happy to add that it was maintained throughout the day with the utmost gallantry by these brave troops, notwithstanding the repeated efforts of large bodies of the enemy to obtain possession of it. The attack upon the right of our centre was accompanied by a very heavy cannonade upon our whole line, which was destined to support the repeated attacks of cavalry and infantry, occasionally mixed, but sometimes separate, which were made upon it. In one of these the enemy carried the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte, as the detachment of the light battalion of the German Legion, which occupied it, had expended all its ammunition, and the enemy occupied the only communication that was with them. The enemy repeatedly charged our infantry with his cavalry, but these attacks were uniformly unsuccessful, and they afforded opportunities to our cavalry to charge, in one of which Lord Edward Somerset's brigade, consisting of the Life Guards, the Royal Horse Guards and 1st Dragoon Guards, highly distinguished themselves, as did that of Major General Sir William Ponsonby, having taken many prisoners and an eagle. These attacks were repeated till about 7 in the evening, when the enemy made a desperate effort with cavalry and infantry, supported by the fire of artillery, to force our left centre, near the farm of La Haye-Sainte, which, after a severe contest, was defeated, and, having observed that the troops retired from this attack in great confusion, and that the march of General Buller's corps, by Frischemont, upon Plancenoit and La Belle Alliance, had begun to take effect, and as I could perceive the fire of his cannon, and as Marshal Prince Blucher had joined in person with a corps of his army to the left of our line by Ohain, I determined to attack the enemy and immediately advance the whole line of infantry, supported by the cavalry and artillery. The attack succeeded in every point. The enemy was forced from his positions on the heights and fled in the utmost confusion, leaving behind him, as far as I could judge, 150 pieces of cannon, with their ammunition, which fell into our hands. I continued the pursuit till long after dark, and then discontinued it only on account of the fatigue of our troops, who had been engaged during 12 hours, and because I found myself on the same road with Marshal Blucher, who assured me of his intention to follow the enemy throughout the night. He has sent me word this morning that he had taken 60 pieces of cannon belonging to the Imperial Guard, and several carriages, baggage, etc., belonging to Bonaparte, in Genappe. I propose to move this morning upon Nivelles, and not to discontinue my operations. Your Lordship will observe that such a desperate action could not be fought, and such advantages could not be gained, without great loss, and I am sorry to add that ours has been immense. In Lieutenant General Sir Thomas Picton, His Majesty has sustained the loss of an officer who has frequently distinguished himself in his service, and he fell gloriously leading his division to a charge with bayonets, by which one of the most serious attacks made by the enemy on our position was repulsed. The Earl of Uxbridge, after having successfully got through this arduous day, received a wound by almost the last shot fired, which will, I am afraid, deprive His Majesty for some time of his services. His Royal Highness the Prince of Orange distinguished himself by his gallantry and conduct till he received a wound from a musket ball through the shoulder, which obliged him to quit the field. It gives me the greatest satisfaction to assure your Lordship that the army never, upon any occasion, conducted itself better. The Division of Guards under Lieutenant General Cook, who is severely wounded, Major General Maitland, and Major General Byng, set an example that was followed by all, and there is no officer nor description of troops that did not behave well. I must, however, particularly mention, for His Royal Highness's approbation, Lieutenant General Sir Henry Clinton, Major General Adam, Lieutenant General Charles Baron Alton, severely wounded, Major General Sir Colin Halkett, severely wounded, Colonel Ompteda, Colonel Mitchell, commanding a brigade of the 4th Division, Majors General Sir James Kempt and Sir Dennis Pack, Major General Lambert, Major General Lord Edward Somerset, Major General Sir William Ponsonby, Major General Sir Cahoon Grant, and Major General Sir Hussey Vivian, Major General Sir J.O. Vandeleur, and Major General Count Dornberg. I am also particularly indebted to General Lord Hill for his assistance and conduct upon this, as upon all former occasions. The artillery and engineer departments were conducted much to my satisfaction, by Colonel Sir George Wood and Colonel Smith, and I had every reason to be satisfied with the conduct of the Adjutant General, Major General Barnes, who was wounded, and of the Quartermaster General Colonel Delancey, who was killed by a cannon shot in the middle of the action. This officer is a serious loss to His Majesty's service, and to me at this moment. I was likewise much indebted to the assistance of Lieutenant Colonel Lord Fitzroy Somerset, who was severely wounded, and of the officers composing my personal staff, who have suffered severely in this action. Lieutenant Colonel the Honourable Sir Alexander Gordon, who has died of his wounds, was a most promising officer, and is a serious loss to His Majesty's service. General Cruiser of the Nassau service likewise conducted himself much to my satisfaction, as did General Tripp, commanding the heavy brigade of cavalry, and General Van Hope, commanding a brigade of infantry in the service of the King of the Netherlands. General Pozzo di Borgo, General Baron Vincent, General Muffling, and General Alava were in the field during the action, and rendered me every assistance in their power. Baron Vincent is wounded, but I hope not severely, and General Pozzo di Borgo received a contusion. I should not do justice to my own feelings, or to Marshal Blucher and the Prussian army, if I did not attribute the successful result of this arduous day to the cordial and timely assistance I received from them. The operation of General Bullo upon the enemy's flank was a most decisive one, and, even if I had not found myself in a situation to make the attack which produced the final result, it would have forced the enemy to retire if his attacks should have failed, and would have prevented him from taking advantage of them if they should unfortunately have succeeded. Since writing the above, I have received a report that Major General Sir William Ponsonby is killed, and, in announcing this intelligence to your lordship, I have to add the expression of my grief for the fate of an officer who had already rendered very brilliant and important services and was an ornament to his profession. I send with this dispatch 2 eagles, taken by the troops in this action, which Major Percy will have the honour of laying at the feet of His Royal Highness. I beg leave to recommend him to your lordship's protection. I have the honour to be, etc. Wellington. To Earl Bathurst. Brussels, June 19, 1815. My Lord, I have to inform your lordship, in addition to my dispatch of this morning, that we have already got here 5,000 prisoners, taken in the action of yesterday, and that there are above 2,000 more coming in tomorrow. There will probably be many more. Amongst the prisoners are the Comte de L'Urbau, who commanded the 6th Corps, and General Combronne, who commanded a division of the Guard. I propose to send the whole to England, by Ostend. I have the honour to be, etc. Wellington. Marshal Blucher's official report of the operations of the Prussian army of the Lower Rhine. On the 17th, in the evening, the Prussian army concentrated itself in the environs of Wavre. Napoleon put himself in motion against Lord Wellington upon the great road leading from Charleroi to Brussels. An English division maintained, on the same day, 16th, near Quatre Bras, a very severe contest with the enemy. Lord Wellington had taken a position on the road to Brussels, having his right wing leaning upon Braine-l'Alleud, the centre near Mont Street Jean, and the left wing against La Haye-Sainte. Lord Wellington wrote to the Field Marshal that he was resolved to accept the battle in this position if the Field Marshal would support him with 2 corps of his army. The Field Marshal promised to come with his whole army. He even proposed, in case Napoleon should not attack, that the Allies themselves, with their whole united force, should attack him the next day. This may serve to show how little the Battle of the 16th had disorganized the Prussian army, or weakened its moral strength. Thus ended the day of the 17th. Battle of the 18th. At break of day the Prussian army again began to move. The 4th and 2nd Corps marched by Street Lambert, where they were to take a position, covered by the forest, near Frischemont, to take the enemy in the rear when the moment should appear favourable. The 1st Corps was to operate by Ohain, on the right flank of the enemy. The 3rd Corps was to follow slowly, in order to afford succour in case of need. The battle began about 10 o'clock in the morning. The English army occupied the heights of Mont Street Jean, that of the French was on the heights before Plancenoit. The former was about 80,000 strong, the enemy had above 130,000. In a short time, the battle became general along the whole line. It seems that Napoleon had the design to throw the left wing upon the centre, and thus to effect the separation of the English army from the Prussian, which he believed to be retreating upon Maestricht. For this purpose, he had placed the greatest part of his reserve in the centre, against his right wing, and upon this point he attacked with fury. The English army fought with a valour that is impossible to surpass. The repeated charges of the Old Guard were baffled by the intrepidity of the Scottish regiments, and at every charge, the French cavalry was overthrown by the English cavalry. But the superiority of the enemy in numbers was too great. Napoleon continually brought forward considerable masses, and, with whatever firmness the English troops maintained themselves in their position, it was not possible but that such heroic exertions must have a limit. It was 4:30 o'clock. The excessive difficulties of the passage by the defile of Street Lambert had considerably retarded the march of the Prussian columns, so that only 2 brigades of the 4th Corps had arrived at the covered position which was assigned to them. The decisive moment was come, there was not an instant to be lost. The generals did not suffer it to escape, they resolved immediately to begin the attack with the troops that they had at hand. General Bullo, therefore, with 2 brigades and a corps of cavalry, advanced rapidly upon the rear of the enemy's right wing. The enemy did not lose his presence of mind, he instantly turned his reserve against us, and a murderous conflict began on that side. The combat remained long uncertain, while the battle with the English army still continued with the same violence. Towards 6 o'clock in the evening, we received the news that General Thielmann, with the 3rd Corps, was attacked near Wavre by a very considerable corps of the enemy, and that they were already disputing the possession of the town. The field marshal, however, did not suffer himself to be disturbed by this news. It was on the spot where he was, and nowhere else, that the affair was to be decided. A conflict continually supported by the same obstinacy, and kept up by fresh troops, could alone ensure the victory, and if it were obtained here, any reverse sustained near Wavre was of little consequence. The columns, therefore, continued their movements. It was half an hour past 7, and the issue of the battle was still uncertain. The whole of the 4th Corps, and a part of the 2nd, under General Perch, had successively come up. The French troops fought with desperate fury, however, some uncertainty was perceived in their movements, and it was observed that some pieces of cannon were retreating. At this moment, the first columns of the corps of General Zieten arrived on the points of attack, near the village of Smohan, on the enemy's right flank, and instantly charged. This movement decided the defeat of the enemy. His right wing was broken in 3 places, he abandoned his positions. Our troops rushed forward at the pas de charge and attacked him on all sides, while, at the same time, the whole English line advanced. Circumstances were extremely favorable to the attack formed by the Prussian army. The ground rose in an amphitheater, so that our artillery could freely open its fire from the summit of a great many heights which rose gradually above each other, and in the intervals of which the troops descended into the plain, formed into brigades, and in the greatest order, while fresh columns continually unfolded themselves, issuing from the forest on the height behind us. The enemy, however, still preserved means to retreat, till the village of Plancenoit, which he had on his rear and which was defended by the guard, was, after several bloody attacks, carried by storm. From that time the retreat became a rout that soon spread throughout the whole French army, which, in its dreadful confusion, hurrying away everything that attempted to stop it, soon assumed the appearance of the flight of an army of barbarians. It was 9:30. The field marshal assembled all the superior officers and gave orders to send the last horse and the last man in pursuit of the enemy. The van of the army accelerated its march. The French, being pursued without intermission, were absolutely disorganized. The causeway presented the appearance of an immense shipwreck. It was covered with an innumerable quantity of cannon, caissons, carriages, baggage, arms, and wrecks of every kind. Those of the enemy who had attempted to repose for a time and had not expected to be so quickly pursued were driven from more than 9 bivouacs. In some villages, they attempted to maintain themselves, but as soon as they heard the beating of our drums, or the sound of the trumpet, they either fled or threw themselves into the houses, where they were cut down or made prisoners. It was moonlight, which greatly favored the pursuit, for the whole march was but a continued chase, either in the cornfields or the houses. At Genappe, the enemy had entrenched himself with cannon and overturned carriages. At our approach, we suddenly heard in the town a great noise, and a motion of carriages. At the entrance we were exposed to a brisk fire of musketry. We replied with some cannon shot, followed by a hurrah. And an instant after, the town was ours. It was here that, among many other equipages, the carriage of Napoleon was taken. He had just left it to mount on horseback, and, in his hurry, had forgotten in it his sword and hat. Thus the affairs continued till break of day. About 40,000 men, in the most complete disorder, the remains of the whole army have saved themselves, retreating through Charleroi, partly without arms, and carrying with them only 27 pieces of their numerous artillery. The enemy, in his flight, had passed all his fortresses, the only defense of his frontiers, which are now passed by our armies. At 3 o'clock, Napoleon had dispatched, from the field of battle, a courier to Paris, with the news that victory was no longer doubtful. A few hours after, he had no longer any army left. We have not yet an exact account of the enemy's loss. It is enough to know that 2/3 of the whole were killed, wounded, or prisoners. Among the latter are Generals Mouton, de Lobau, Duhesme, and Campan. Up to this time, about 300 cannon, and above 500 caissons, are in our hands. Few victories have been so complete, and there is certainly no example that an army 2 days after losing a battle, engaged in such an action, and so gloriously maintained it. Honor be to troops capable of so much firmness and valor. In the middle of the position occupied by the French army, and exactly upon the height, is a farm called La Belle Alliance. The march of all the Prussian columns was directed towards this farm, which was visible from every side. It was there that Napoleon was during the battle. It was thence that he gave his orders, that he flattered himself with the hopes of victory, and it was there that his ruin was decided. There, too, was that, by a happy chance, Field Marshal Blucher and Lord Wellington met in the dark, and mutually saluted each other as victors. In commemoration of the alliance that now subsists between the English and Prussian nations, of the union of the two armies, and their reciprocal confidence, the Field Marshal desired that this battle should bear the name of La Belle Alliance. By order of Field Marshal Blucher. General Gneisenau. French official account. Paris, June 21, 1815. Battle of Mont St. Jean. At 9 in the morning, the rain having somewhat abated, the First Corps put itself in motion and placed itself with the left on the road to Brussels, and opposite the village of Mont St. Jean, which appeared the centre of the enemy's position. The Second Corps leaned its right upon the road to Brussels, and its left upon a small wood, within cannon shot of the English army. The cuirassiers were in reserve behind, and the guard in reserve upon the heights. The Sixth Corps, with the cavalry of General de Mon, under the order of Count de Lobau, was destined to proceed in the rear of our right to oppose a Prussian corps, which appeared to have escaped Marshal Grouchy, and to intend to fall upon our right flank, an intention that had been made known to us by our reports, and by the letter of a Prussian general, enclosing an order of battle, and which was taken by our light troops. The troops were full of ardor. We estimated the force of the English army at 80,000 men. We supposed that the Prussian corps, which might be in line towards the right, might be 15,000 men. The enemy's force, then, was upwards of 90,000 men, ours less numerous. At noon, all the preparations being terminated, Prince Jerome, commanding a division of the Second Corps and destined to form the extreme left of it, advanced upon the wood of which the enemy occupied a part. The cannonade began. The enemy supported, with 30 pieces of cannon, the troops he had sent to keep the wood. We made also on our side dispositions of artillery. At 1 o'clock, Prince Jerome was master of all the wood, and the whole English army fell back behind a curtain. Count d'Aulon then attacked the village of Mont St. Jean and supported his attack with 80 pieces of cannon, which must have occasioned great loss to the English army. All the efforts were made towards the ridge. A brigade of the 1st Division of Count d'Aulon took the village of Mont St. Jean, a second brigade was charged by a corps of English cavalry, which occasioned it much loss. At the same moment, a division of English cavalry charged the battery of Count d'Aulon by its right, and disorganized several pieces, but the cuirassiers of General Millet charged that division, 3 regiments of which were broken and cut up. This concludes the 11th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. What do you think of Cotton's description of the battle? Please subscribe for more stories and leave a comment.